The camera didn't disappear because of a power failure, a technical glitch, or a remote hack. At exactly 1:47 a.m., someone walked up to the front door of an 84-year-old woman's home, used their bare hands to remove the Nest camera from the wall, and carried it away into the darkness. This is not a theory but the first confirmed fact in the case, established by FBI forensic analysis and publicly confirmed by the Pima County Sheriff. And that detail changes everything about how we understand what happened. Because at the center of the investigation is a contradiction. The man seen on surveillance that night, the one whose image was widely broadcast and seen by millions, was not the whole story. He may not have been the story at all. According to law enforcement sources cited by Michael Ruiz, FBI forensic teams spent nearly 10 days working alongside Google to recover residual data from the same Nest camera system. What they uncovered wasn't limited to the night of the disappearance. They found footage from January 11th, 3 weeks earlier. The same individual, standing at the same front door. But this time, there was no backpack, no weapon, no gear of any kind. He wasn't there to act. He was there to observe. And that changes everything. Because if that same person returned 3 weeks later, fully prepared and knowing exactly which door to approach, then the question investigators are now asking is no longer just who he is, but what he had been planning all along. The question now is no longer just who he is, but who told him that the door would be open. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, lived alone in Tucson. She required daily heart medication, had a pacemaker, and according to Chris Nanos, she could not walk 50 yards without assistance. On the night of January 31st, 2026, she returned home from dinner at her daughter's house, entered through the garage, and was never seen again. 46 days later, there is still no confirmed proof of life. But what the cameras didn't capture may be even more disturbing. 3 weeks before she disappeared, someone stood at her front door in the dark. No knock, no attempt to enter, no explanation. According to law enforcement sources confirmed by Fox News, forensic analysis recovered that image from January 11th. The figure had no backpack, no weapon, no tools, just a person standing silently at the door of a woman who lived alone, long enough to be recorded by a camera that would later be physically torn off and taken away. Nancy Guthrie had moved to Tucson to be closer to her daughter, Annie, not out of convenience, but necessity. Her health demanded it. According to Chris Nanos, she could not walk more than 50 yards without assistance. She took heart medication daily, and inside her chest was a pacemaker continuously recording cardiac data, quietly transmitting it to the manufacturer's servers around the clock, independent of any phone or home network. Everything was being logged, whether she realized it or not. Her life in Tucson followed a routine that those around her knew well. On weekends and Friday evenings, she often spent time at Annie's home, having dinner, playing cards, staying late. And on the night of January 31st, it was no different. A calm, familiar evening with family. Her son-in-law, Tommaso, drove her home, pulling into the garage at 9:48 p.m. The garage door closed at 9:50, and he left. It wasn't hidden. It was simply her life. But that routine may now be part of something more. According to reporting by Brian Anton, on day 45 of the investigation, FBI agents returned to the neighborhood and began asking neighbors a very specific question. Had any contractors or cleaning crews been given access to homes in the area? The question investigators are asking is not broad, it's precise and targeted. The ransom notes that appeared after Nancy Guthrie disappeared referenced 2 details inside her home that had never been made public: the exact location of her Apple Watch and a broken floodlight at the back of the property. Both details were confirmed by FBI Special Agent Heath Jenica and reported by KOLD News 13 and TMZ. That level of interior knowledge cannot come from simply standing outside and looking in. And there is another detail that raises even more questions. According to reporting by Brian Enton and accounts from residents in the area, the Ring camera belonging to the neighbor directly behind her home was offline the night she vanished. The homeowner said they had never seen a "not available" status on that device before. An FBI source described the coincidence as odd, but no official explanation has been given. January 11th was a Saturday. January 24th, another date FBI agents later specifically asked neighbors about when investigating unusual activity, was also a Saturday. Investigators have not ignored that pattern. On her final Friday night, she sat at her daughter's table, her medication remained at home, and her pacemaker continued recording. Whatever was waiting for her when that garage door closed had likely been watching for weeks. The last confirmed image of her shows that garage door shutting at 9:50 p.m. On January 31st, 2026, Tommaso Cayenne had just dropped Nancy Guthrie off at her home. Surveillance footage captured the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m., and after that, nothing. No movement outside, no additional footage from that side of the house, no sign of activity for the next 4 hours. Then, at 1:47 a.m., the silence was broken. At that exact moment, the front door camera went offline. According to the FBI and confirmed by Chris Nanos, this was not a power failure or remote interference. The camera was physically removed from the wall and taken from the property. Whoever did it didn't cut power or attempt any technical disruption. They simply walked up to the house in the middle of the night, tore the device off with their hands, and left with it. At 2:12 a.m., a second camera on the property detected motion, but captured no video, only a timestamp. Something had moved. Then, at 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker stopped syncing with her phone. The device only connects when both are within close range, and according to Sheriff Nanos, that connection suddenly dropped. The pacemaker continued recording data to the manufacturer's servers, just as it always had, but Nancy was now more than 30 feet away from her own phone. Her Apple Watch remained inside the house. Her daily heart medication was still there. And she was gone. According to Chris Nanos, both her Apple Watch and her daily medication were left exactly where they had always been, untouched, unmoved, not packed. Then, at 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera located about 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home captured an unidentified vehicle. The footage confirmed its presence, but as of day 46 of the investigation, law enforcement had not publicly identified the make, model, or license plate. The following afternoon, her family called 911. Officers arrived at 12:15 p.m. on February 1st. What they discovered at the front entrance quickly became one of the most critical pieces of evidence. According to Sheriff Nanos, later examined by Dr. Michael Benn and FBI profiler Jim Clementi, there were drops of blood at the front door. The pattern was precise, round droplets falling straight down, consistent with a stationary source. There were no footprints between them. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. That same day, the ransom notes began to surface. The first was submitted through an online portal to KOLD News 13 in Tucson, confirmed by FBI Special Agent Hythe Janicki. More followed on February 2nd, sent to TMZ and other outlets. The demand, $6 million in Bitcoin. Deadlines were set for February 5th and then February 9th, but both passed with no payment, no response, and no verified proof that she was still alive. What the notes did include, however, was impossible for investigators to ignore. They described the exact location of her Apple Watch inside the house and referenced a broken floodlight at the back of the property. Two specific details never made public. Details that could only come from someone who had been inside. Then, on February 5th, the FBI made an arrest, 42-year-old Derek Kalla from Hawthorne, California. The man investigators first arrested was not the one they were looking for. Derek Kalla had sent fraudulent ransom messages to Annie and Tommaso using a VIP number, later traced to a Gmail account in his name. According to federal authorities, he had no connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. He had simply followed the case in the news and inserted himself into it. He was charged, but the real author of the ransom notes remained unknown. The person who knew about the Apple Watch and the broken floodlight, details only someone inside the house could recognize, was still out there. And both ransom deadlines had passed in complete silence. What investigators uncovered next only deepened the mystery. Using chip-off forensics on the stolen Nest camera, the FBI extracted internal storage data and spent nearly 10 days working with Google to recover residual cloud backups. According to Michael Ruiz, citing multiple law enforcement sources, The data didn't just include footage from the night she vanished, it revealed images from January 11th, 3 weeks earlier. The same individual stood at the same front door, but this time with nothing. No backpack, no holster, no flashlight, no tools. Now compare that to the night of January 31st. According to Chris Nanos, the same suspect returned carrying a black Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack, wearing a chest holster, and holding a flashlight in his mouth. In his shirt pocket, investigators noted another detail. As explained by former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer and reported by Newsweek, it appeared to be a walkie-talkie, not a jammer, not a phone, but a real-time communication device. And that changes the entire scenario. A walkie-talkie is not used alone. It implies coordination. It suggests that the man seen in the footage was not acting by himself, but was in active contact with at least one other person positioned elsewhere, someone guiding or responding as events unfolded. That conclusion is reinforced by forensic evidence. In an interview with NBC News on March 12, Sheriff Nanos confirmed that DNA testing inside the home revealed a mixed profile, evidence pointing to at least 2 individuals involved. Neither DNA profile belonged to Nancy Guthrie, and neither matched anything in the federal CODIS database. 2 unidentified individuals, both absent from law enforcement records, had been inside that house. Now place that beside the ransom notes. Confirmed by FBI agent Hyth Janicki and reported by KOLD News 13 and TMZ, those messages referenced the exact location of her Apple Watch and the fact that the floodlight at the back of the property was broken. Neither detail had ever been made public. Neither could be seen from outside. Whoever wrote those notes had been inside and had paid close attention. Former FBI Assistant Director James Gagliano described the case as red-hot in interviews with Fox News and CNN, while also criticizing how information had been handled publicly. Meanwhile, former FBI agent Steve Moore, speaking to Brian Anton, assessed the suspect as someone without professional training. And that detail shifts everything. Because if the man on camera wasn't a professional, then the level of planning, the visit 3 weeks prior, the knowledge of the home, the use of a walkie-talkie, the precise timing, didn't come from experience. It came from information. Someone told him which door would be open. Someone knew where the Apple Watch was. Someone knew the floodlight was broken. Someone understood the routine, that Nancy would return late, through a garage that opened into the dark. And someone was on the other end of that walkie-talkie. The FBI has confirmed mixed DNA from 2 unknown individuals, confirmed the pre-visit on January 11th, and confirmed the communication device seen in the footage. What they have not revealed is who those individuals are, or who provided the knowledge that made this possible. Because the real question was never just about the man seen on camera. It was about who let him in. And now investigators are following that thread further. The black Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack carried that night is sold exclusively through Walmart. According to Chris Nanos, the FBI is actively working with the retailer to trace purchase records, because they believe that trail may finally lead to a name. The chest holster seen in the footage follows the same trail as the backpack. It's also sold through Walmart. Investigators didn't stop there. They approached local gun stores with highly specific questions about that exact model. These aren't broad, unfocused searches. They are precise, deliberate moves, signs that investigators may already have a direction and are now building the evidence to support it. Then there's the flashlight, an overlooked detail that could become critical. April Stonehouse of Arizona State University explained in an interview with Brian Enton that the image of the suspect holding a flashlight in his mouth presents a unique forensic opportunity. Saliva left on the surface could produce a DNA profile, one that might confirm or eliminate a suspect entirely. According to her analysis, the FBI has been actively searching for that flashlight. As of now, it has not been publicly recovered. On February 5th, federal agents arrested Derek Kalla, 42, from Hawthorne, California. He had obtained contact information for Nancy's daughter Annie and her husband Tommaso, sending ransom texts through a masked VIP number. Those messages were traced back to a Gmail account in his name. He was charged, but, according to authorities, had no role in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. He had simply followed the case as it gained national attention and tried to exploit it. The real ransom notes, the ones that mentioned the Apple Watch and the broken floodlight, came from someone else entirely. The second deadline passed on February 9th with no payment, no response, and no proof of life. By day 39, cadaver dogs were withdrawn. By day 41, the home was returned to the family after final forensic processing. And then, on day 45, the FBI came back. According to Brian Enton and confirmed by neighbors, agents returned with a very specific focus, asking about contractors and cleaning crews who had been given access to homes in the area. Investigators weren't asking about strangers or random vehicles. Their focus was far more specific, on people who had been invited inside, who had stood at that front door, been given time in the home, trusted enough to be left alone. The implication is clear. The level of detail found in the ransom notes, knowing exactly where a personal device was kept, knowing which outdoor light had failed, did not come from watching the house from outside. It came from access. Then there's the unexplained gap in surveillance. The Ring camera belonging to the neighbor directly behind Nancy Guthrie's property was offline the night she disappeared. According to reporting by Brian Enton and the neighbor's own account, that device had never displayed a "not available" status before. A source close to the investigation described the coincidence to Brian Anton as odd. No official explanation has been provided. Even the family's vehicle became part of the investigation. Annie Guthrie's Honda CR-V was held by authorities for more than 40 days. According to Brian Enton, citing independent sources, the car's electronic systems malfunctioned after data was extracted and required dealer servicing before it could be returned. It has since been given back to the family. Less visible, but no less important, is the pacemaker. The device continuously logs cardiac data and transmits it directly to the manufacturer's servers, independent of any phone or home network. Chris Nanos has confirmed its existence and its recording function. What that data reveals about the critical window between 2:28 a.m. and the following afternoon, and what investigators may have concluded from it, has not been made public. On March 12, in an interview with NBC News, Sheriff Nanos stated that he has known the motive in this case from the very beginning. He did not disclose it. He also warned that the individual seen in the footage could potentially commit a similar crime again. An 84-year-old woman is still missing, and the people responsible left behind DNA from two unidentified individuals, identities that, even now, remain unknown. There was a documented visit to the property 3 weeks before the crime. A two-way radio suggesting real-time coordination. And ransom notes revealing details only someone who had been inside the house could know. Yet the man leading the investigation, Chris Nanos, has stated that he understood the motive from the very beginning, and still hasn't revealed it. On February 2nd, just one day after blood was discovered at Nancy Guthrie's front door and ransom notes surfaced, the sheriff publicly stated there was no danger to the community. This, despite the fact that an 84-year-old woman, who required daily heart medication and could not walk 50 yards without assistance, had vanished from her home in the middle of the night. The message was clear: the public had nothing to fear. But on March 12, in an interview with NBC News, that position shifted. Sheriff Nanos said he had known the motive since day one, and warned that the person responsible might commit a similar crime again. Those two statements don't align. And that contradiction has never been publicly explained. It's part of a broader pattern that investigators and reporters began to notice early on. When asked a simple, verifiable question, who drove Nancy home that night, the answers changed. First, it was Annie. Then it was Annie and Tommaso together. Later, it was said to be Tommaso alone. Eventually, according to reporting by Brian Enton, internal guidance shifted to using the word family instead of naming anyone specifically. Meanwhile, surveillance footage remained consistent. A vehicle pulling into the garage at 9:48 p.m., a fixed point in a case where many other details continue to shift. This was not unclear or disputed information, it was documented. Yet the lead investigator, Chris Nanos, gave conflicting public accounts of who drove Nancy Guthrie home, changing his answer multiple times. To experienced eyes, that inconsistency stood out. Retired Deputy Richard Castigar Jr. told the Daily Mail that control of the case should have been handed to the FBI weeks earlier, describing Nanos as a micromanager, implying the delay was personal, not procedural. Former FBI Supervisor James Gagliano went further, calling the case red-hot in interviews with Fox News and CNN, while openly criticizing how information had been managed. The strongest concern came from how DNA evidence was handled. Instead of sending it to the FBI lab in Quantico, it was submitted to a private lab in Florida. DNA Labs International, a decision federal sources described as illogical for a case of this scale, requiring retesting before it could even be used. At the same time, the crime scene was released in less than 20 hours, soon enough for media to capture images of blood at the front entrance. Nanos later admitted the move may have been premature, calling it Monday morning quarterbacking. But the contradictions didn't stop there. Publicly, he said investigators had no identity for the suspect. Yet, according to Brian Enton, FBI agents were already showing photos around local businesses, actively seeking identification. That gap between what was said and what was done raised deeper questions. Former FBI and CIA officer Tracy Walder posed one that still hasn't been answered. Was Nancy ever the true target, or was the real focus her daughter, a high-profile media figure, with Nancy simply the most accessible point? For now, that possibility remains open, alongside a more familiar theory, a planned abduction for ransom, one that has yet to reach its conclusion. Law enforcement has not ruled out a traditional kidnapping, but the deeper this case is examined, the more that narrative begins to fracture. John Miller, speaking to CBS News, did not hesitate in his assessment. In his view, the crime went wrong almost immediately. He went further, suggesting the ransom notes may not have been genuine demands at all, but something constructed after the fact, an attempt to create the illusion of a live negotiation to steer both investigators and the public toward a story that may never have existed. That perspective is reinforced by veteran homicide detective Paul Celino, who told the New York Post plainly that he does not believe this was a kidnapping. These are not speculative voices. They are investigators who understand the mechanics of real ransom cases. And at the center of their doubt is one non-negotiable principle: proof of life. Every legitimate kidnapping for ransom depends on it. Without proof the victim is alive, there is no leverage, no pressure, no reason for a family to comply. And yet in this case, both deadlines, February 5th and February 9th, passed without a single verified communication. No voice, no image, no message that could confirm that Nancy Guthrie was still alive. Silence like that is not strategy, it's absence. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer had already pointed to the walkie-talkie scene in the footage as evidence of coordination. But on March 10th, her tone shifted. In a brief public statement, she suggested the search phase was over, describing the situation only as half glass full. No details. No elaboration. Just a carefully chosen phrase from someone trained to measure every word. By that point, cadaver dogs had already been withdrawn, quietly marking a shift in the investigation's direction. Now place all of that against the physical timeline. The suspect appears on January 11th. No gear, no action, just watching. 3 weeks later, he returns prepared: backpack, holster, flashlight, two-way radio. He moves with purpose. He knows the layout. He knows details that cannot be seen from outside, the exact placement of an Apple Watch, the condition of a broken floodlight. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from observation. It comes from access. And that's where the case becomes something else entirely. Because if the suspect wasn't acting alone, if the planning didn't come from professional experience, then it came from someone who knew. Someone who had been inside. Someone who understood the routine. Someone who didn't need to guess. Which brings the investigation back to the question that has been there from the beginning: quiet, but unavoidable. Not who was at the door that night, but who made sure it would be open. At least 2 individuals were inside the home, confirmed by mixed DNA, and neither profile matches anything in the federal database. That means no prior record, no existing identity in the system. At the same time, the camera behind Nancy Guthrie's property went offline that night, for the first and only time it had ever done so. A nearby utility box was also reported damaged and reviewed by Fox News, though no formal connection has been confirmed. Each detail on its own raises questions. Together, they point to something coordinated. And that brings everything back to the central unknown. What actually happened inside that house? And what, exactly, was the two-way radio coordinating? Because according to multiple experienced investigators, the answer may not lie in the ransom story at all. John Miller, Paul Celino, and Jennifer Coffindaffer have all pointed, directly or indirectly, to the same conclusion. The ransom notes may have been written after the critical event had already occurred. Not as a demand, but as a cover. A constructed narrative meant to redirect attention, to keep investigators focused on a negotiation that may never have truly existed. If that reading is accurate, then the events of that night take on a very different meaning. The access to the home, the silence after deadlines, the lack of proof of life, it wasn't a breakdown in a plan. It may have been the plan itself. And at the center of it, Chris Nanos has stated he has known the motive since the beginning, yet has never revealed it publicly. What remains is the established record, clear, sourced, and undisputed. 2 unidentified individuals inside the home. A suspect who first appeared 3 weeks earlier, then returned equipped and in communication with at least one other person. Ransom notes containing precise interior knowledge, details that could only come from direct access. A pacemaker that stopped syncing at 2:28 a.m., placing Nancy away from her phone. Her Apple Watch and medication left behind. A camera physically removed from the scene. Blood at the entrance, confirmed to be hers. These are not fragments or speculation. They are verified elements of a timeline that, when placed together, form a pattern. One that suggests planning, coordination, and knowledge from within. And yet, even with all of that, the most important question remains unanswered. Not just what happened that night, but who made it possible in the first place. What the established record still does not answer may be the most critical part of this entire case. Who are the 2 unidentified individuals whose DNA was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home? How did they gain such precise knowledge of the interior? And more importantly, who gave them that knowledge? The damaged utility box near the residence, reported by Fox News, remains under review. Whether it is connected or simply a coincidence has not been determined. And the neighbor's Ring camera, offline for the first and only time that night, still has no explanation. Patterns begin to emerge the closer you look. The suspect appears on January 11th, then again weeks later, both on weekends. That detail may suggest a structured routine, someone with obligations during the week. Meanwhile, the pacemaker, quietly recording and transmitting data independently, may hold a timeline of those missing hours after 2:28 a.m., but whatever it shows has not been made public. What has been confirmed is where the investigation is now focusing. The FBI has requested purchase records from Walmart tied to the backpack and chest holster. Local gun stores have been contacted. And on day 45, agents returned to the neighborhood with a purpose. Not asking about strangers, but about contractors, cleaners, anyone who had legitimate access inside homes. That line of questioning is not random. It points directly to one conclusion. The information in the ransom notes came from someone who had been inside and had a reason to be there. The family continues to search for answers. A $1 million reward has been offered. Public appeals continue. At the same time, independent reporting has identified Dominic Evans as a potential figure worth scrutiny due to alleged connections and background, but this remains unverified, and he has not been charged or officially named by law enforcement. What remains is a case still unfolding in real time. No confirmed proof of life. No confirmed resolution. Only a growing structure of facts, a pre-visit weeks before the event, a return with preparation, evidence of coordination, and knowledge that could not have come from the outside. Because in the end, this is not just a mystery about what happened, it's about how it was made possible. Nancy Guthrie walked into her home at 9:50 p.m., a routine night, a familiar pattern, and vanished into something that had likely been planned long before she arrived. Everything since, the evidence, the contradictions, the silence, has been an attempt to reconstruct that moment. One fact at a time. Viet Dai Han. What the established record still does not answer may ultimately define this entire case. Who are the two unidentified individuals whose DNA was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home? Two people with no match in the federal database, no prior record, no identity investigators can immediately trace. How did they obtain such precise, intimate knowledge of the house's interior? And perhaps most critically, who gave them that access? Other anomalies remain just as unresolved. A damaged utility box near the residence, reported by Fox News, is still under review, its connection to the case unclear. The neighbor's Ring camera, positioned directly behind the property, went offline that night for the first and only time, a failure that has never been explained. These are not isolated details. They sit alongside each other, forming a pattern that suggests coordination rather than coincidence. The timeline itself adds another layer. The suspect appears on January 11th, then returns weeks later, both on weekends. That repetition may indicate a structured routine, someone unavailable during the workweek. Meanwhile, the pacemaker, continuously logging and transmitting data independent of any phone, may hold a silent record of the critical hours after 2:28 a.m. What it captured, and what investigators may have learned from it, remains undisclosed. What is clear is where the investigation is heading. The FBI has formally requested purchase records from Walmart tied to the backpack and chest holsters seen in the footage. Local gun stores have been contacted. And on day 45, agents returned to the neighborhood with a sharply focused question, not about strangers, but about people who had been allowed inside: contractors, cleaners, anyone with legitimate access. That direction carries a specific implication. The knowledge in the ransom notes came from someone who entered through the front door with a reason to be there. The family continues to push forward. A $1 million reward stands. Public appeals continue. At the same time, independent reporting has pointed to Dominic Evans as someone whose alleged connections and background raise questions, but this remains unverified, and he has not been charged or officially named by authorities. So the case remains suspended between what is known and what is still hidden. There is no confirmed proof of life. No definitive conclusion. Only a growing structure of facts, a pre-visit that looks like surveillance, a return that shows preparation, evidence of coordination through a two-way radio, and knowledge that could not have come from outside observation. Because in the end, this is no longer just about what happened inside that house. It's about how it was made possible in the first place. Nancy Guthrie walked into her home at 9:50 p.m., a routine moment at the end of an ordinary evening. That was the last confirmed image. Everything that followed, the blood at the entrance, the unidentified DNA, the removed camera, the silence after deadlines, has been an effort to reconstruct what came next. And somewhere within that reconstruction lies the answer. Not just to what happened that night, but to who knew enough to make sure it could.